So, February 3rd, 1959, the day the music died, immortalized by Don McLean in his song American Pie, the day that Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper died in a plane crash. But here's the thing. I think when future historians study this phenomenon of pop music, of rock and roll, I don't think that they will consider 3rd February 1959 to be the day the music died. I think instead that day will be 30th November 2022. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Ministry of Guitar. I'm Utkarsh coming to you from Singapore. This is a video on a slightly less than optimistic note, but bear with me, and I would actually like it if you argue back with a counter argument to what I'm going to say, because a lot of videos that I've been doing on the channel, a lot of analysis, a lot of thinking that I've been doing concerning the music industry, everything is just pointing to one direction. On a happier note, I recently saw the movie La Bamba for the first time. That's why the day the music died is fresh in my memory because I was watching it with my wife, and of course we all know how that ends, right? La Bamba is a story of Ritchie Valens and then the plane crash. Completely shocked her. I told her about what a shocking day that was, how that day was immortalized in the song and everything. But then I was thinking about it, and I was trying to think about it. Was February 3rd, 1959 really the day that the music died? It wasn't actually. I mean, all of them created a movement that was much bigger, and the golden age of pop rock music was to follow. But I fear that 30th November 2022 is really the day the music died. What is 30th November 2022? Before we talk about that, yes, I'm stringing this on a little bit on purpose, but I think the background is very important. We need to think about what has been set in motion such that 30th November 2022 becomes an important day, the day the music begins to die or dies. We don't need to go back into too deep history, but maybe we go to the 1980s. And the reason I go to the 1980s is that we see an interesting shift happen when it comes to the way the world is run, or when it comes to the way that big companies operate. The roots of today's extreme shareholder-led capitalism. Capitalism, of course, is designing things for a profit, free markets, all of that. Won't get into too much of it. But one important shift that starts happening in the 80s is that the construct, the understanding between employee and employer, people with more capital and less capital, it kind of starts changing. And particularly for large companies, what starts happening is that incentives are designed for leadership in a manner that the more you drive up the share price by increasing profit, the better it is for you as the leadership of the company. Your compensation goes up. This happens due to a variety of reasons. Even big companies in the US, for example, had relatively welfare-like policies. I mean, a good example is the big American car companies. One reason that they were not competitive versus the Japanese upstarts in the 70s, the Toyotas and whoever, Nissans that came in the US and ate the lunch of General Motors and Ford and all of that, was because these American companies had these welfare systems, these pension systems, and they just could not compete on cost with these new Japanese manufacturers because they had all the pensions to pay off all the employees who had retired. So they kind of learned the lesson the hard way. And I think American companies and the American government, and in general, the whole system became a lot more company friendly, a lot more shareholder friendly, at the detriment of the employee and to some extent maybe the customer. Now, why am I talking about all of this? Here's what has happened. Profit has always been the motive for companies in capitalism. It's not a bad thing, but of course, it's a question of how much the focus becomes on profit versus other things, and it's kind of gone in a direction where profit is becoming more and more important. We talked about this a lot of times in this channel. But let's talk about the music industry. The music industry, you have revenue, which used to come from selling records, used to come from album sales, same thing. Now comes from streaming, some share of rights, letting out those rights for whoever wants to use them, so on and so forth. Those are the revenues. What are the costs for the music industry? The cost for the music industry are the people who make the music. So you know where I'm going with this. I've talked about this before, that the cheaper you can make this cost, the better it is from a profit perspective. We talked about in my last video about Spotify, figuring out a way to pay less in artist royalties. One example of profit being sought after by reducing the cost of making said music. There's been something else that is happening. In an attempt to catch attention, in an attempt to really make the process of creating this product of music more predictable, what has happened is that over the years, incredible amounts of analysis and research has been done to the point that you can now basically templateise a pop song. If you look at the pop songs of today, the top 50 charts of today versus the top 50 charts of 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years ago, and I know that Rick Beato has talked about this at length, you essentially see that now it has been homogenized, where you have a template, maybe everything follows that typical Latin beat, or everything follows a certain template for a rap song, or whatever it might be. It's become homogenized, it's become formalized, if that makes sense. So what does that mean? It means that the creative human element of creating a hit profit generating song is becoming less and less important, because in general, figuring out how to create a hit song has been boiled down to a formula. And in general, by driving a lot of formula based music, audiences have gotten used to a formula which kind of works for them, and it kind of is a self-reinforcing cycle where the major pop music is always to a formula. Of course, you have snippets of genius all over the place. It's a little bit like how you have extremely tasty junk food that is extremely popular, is extremely profitable. You have very, very large companies. While of course you have some healthy food happening on each side, right? Where healthy food is probably better for you, but it takes a little bit more to appreciate. Junk is easy to appreciate. Same thing happens with music. Now, how are all of these things connecting together? So what you have are companies that are seeking profit. You have a product that is easier and easier to create with a formula. That's what you have right now. But you still need the human. You still need the human. You still need the musician. You still need to deal with all of that uncertainty. You still need to deal with all of that cost. Right? The analogy is that you could have a machine building your car, or you could have a human building your car. If you deal with a human can fall sick, human can have whatever, right? People are not robots, but robots are robots. What has happened on 30th November 2022 is that the first viable, successful, commercially successful large language model, yes, you know what I'm talking about, ChatGPT was launched. And ChatGPT is just one manifestation of these large language models. There are many other manifestations. And as all of us have seen since in the years since this launch of ChatGPT, that the abilities of these large language models, these AI, so to speak, to ape human production, to ape human performance, whether it is replicating the sound of a voice, whether it is replicating the sound of an instrument, whether it is replicating a picture, a photo, whether it is doing face swap on a video, whether it is creating all those crazy movies that you see the Door Brothers or somebody create, all those trailers that they create, all of that is being done by large language models. Now, in a world where the organizations that employ or rely on human music production and performance for their functioning, in a world where those organizations are a little less profit seeking, where audiences are a little less used to templatized formulaic music, it doesn't matter, because these AIs, they can't replace a real human. They are built to a formula. And if you have organizations that care a little bit more about their employees versus their profits, then there is a consideration of this is a real human making it versus this may be profit, but it's kind of creating an impact on the real human. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world where audiences are used to formulas for their music, right? Each hit sounds like anything else, very easy. If AI doesn't exactly sound like that today, it will sound like that in 2 years, 3 years. Just see the evolution that has happened on AI video from 2 years ago till now. So creating a formulaic music hit is going to be incredibly easy for these large language models, right? It's going to be incredibly easy. And that is what audiences want. There will be small bits and pieces here and there of people who want something a little bit more complicated. I myself am waiting for the new Opeth album as an example. But by and large, for mass popular production, it's going to just be anonymous, relatively anonymous creations of music that all sound the same, that make you want to raise your hands when you're in a party, or gives you a certain mood when you want it, all created through large language models. It's very easy for the companies because these models, you don't have to pay a salary. You keep developing them. It's the algorithm that keeps giving. Look at Google and YouTube. They have algorithms, and Meta, they have algorithms that keep serving them ways and means for them to keep getting people's attention, that they keep optimizing, that they can then turn into profit through selling ads. Similarly, you're going to have algorithms that get better and better at making hits, get better and better at serving the function that a music company, which is a company at the end of the day maximizing profit, what it's trying to do. Now, this sounds a little bit like a dystopian nightmare, but here's the thing. It's not even a nightmare. It's not even a thing that you may think is happening in the future. It is happening right now. Why do I say that? You all may have heard of something called lo-fi beats, right? Lo-fi beats, the kind of beats you want to listen to while driving or on the background while studying. I was recently reading an article on lo-fi beats. It was in the Straits Times, the newspaper over here in Singapore. And basically the lo-fi beats industry is basically now chock-a-block full of companies that compile the creations of multiple artists. Most of these lo-fi artists are unknown artists. Some of them are doing it in their free time. The person that this particular article focused on was a cancer doctor who does it in his free time. And basically what it's now become is this whole big compilation effort of just thousands and thousands of artists. It's just background music. No one is paying attention to. All of them sound relatively similar, though there is variation. And it is just, at the end of the day, a massive game of which company can most efficiently assemble together as many artists as possible, figure out the best pricing, figure out the most efficient distribution of it, and that's it. And then the audience will just keep listening to it, right? I'm just reading from over here. These channels are, okay, let's go over here. Lo-fi music with its long unobtrusive mixes is proven to be an ideal match for the rise of streaming platforms. Algorithms designed to optimize user engagement recommend lo-fi music because how well they retain listeners. It has attracted record labels aiming to capitalize on this algorithmic appeal, what we're talking about right now, algorithms. Search on YouTube shows dozens of channels. They often use identical copy-pasted biographies talking about anonymity. Doesn't matter who created the music. They're often operated by large companies which use a swarm of accounts, blah, blah, blah. Right? So for example, this is this person, Mr. Sai. I guess he's the person making the music over here. So he says over here that it's led to a lot of bad actors aiming to profit off this genre. Vast majority of these of these lo-fi are, churned out daily, because as long as you have one hit, it's kind of enough to make the whole thing profitable. And all of these groups that are trying to profit off lo-fi hits are constantly reaching out to, by the way, it's Miss Sai, not Mr. Sai, my apologies, are trying to reach out to multiple artists just to accumulate them together. You know what I'm talking about? This is what's happening. Ultimately, they will not need humans to make this lo-fi music. The algorithm, the language model is going to churn it out. In case you're wondering what that sound is behind me, that's my dog barking. And that's it. That is the future. Not to say that you will not have humans making music, not to say that it will stop altogether. But what will happen is in the popular culture or in popular consumption, you will have a few people who are more programmers than musicians. Of course, they'll have a certain ear, they will have a taste for what the audience wants. And they will constantly keep programming these large language models to churn out whatever is the best way to satisfy the algorithm. I guess even this programmer can potentially be automated, because it becomes a self-fulfilling loop where the algorithm figures out what exactly is retaining users for the longest time and then make the music accordingly. You know what this sounds like? This sounds like how YouTube videos and ads work today. How does YouTube optimize everything that you're seeing? It optimizes based on how much you click on it, how long you watch this video. And that's when it comes to you. Imagine the same thing being done with music. except that the people creating the videos or the music is completely automated. It's like this one it's a ATM machine churning out profit for these companies, because it requires no human thing. It's just a set of algorithms that keep getting better, keep feeding on each other, the large language models, and keeps churning profit. Yeah, I think it's inevitable. I think in maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, popular music will just become this entire hailstorm of artificially generated content, which 99.9% of people will be okay with, because it is giving them the sounds that they want. Music listening has become passive anyway. There'll be still some active music listeners who will who will seek out good music. There will be, of course, some people who will not make any money from music, but they will still keep making music anyway. And that ecosystem will exist. But yeah, this is what I suspect the future is. And that's why I say that November 30th, 30th is right, the date, right? Yes, 30th November 2022 was the day the music died.